Hello my friends, I am so glad you are here today. Take a slow breath and let the world fade away for just a moment. Make yourself comfortable. Because I want to share with you a story that will stay with you long after you finish listening. This is a story about a boy who was told he would never amount to anything, who watched his father struggle to hold a stolen crown, who nearly died with an arrow in his face at 16 years old, and who would one day become the most powerful king in the world. Picture with me a cold stone castle in the year of our Lord 1386 or perhaps 1387. The exact year is not even certain, because nobody really believed this child would matter enough to record carefully. He was born at Monmouth Castle, a frontier fortress on the border between England and Wales. His father was Henry Bolingbroke, a nobleman who would soon change the entire course of history by seizing the English throne from a young king named Richard II. The boy was named Henry, after his father, and for his earliest years he lived the quiet life of a minor noble's son, playing in drafty castle halls, learning to ride horses. There was nothing remarkable about him. Nobody looked at this child and saw a future king. He was the second son, not the first. His older brother would inherit everything. This boy was, in every meaningful sense, nobody special. But then something extraordinary happened that would shape Henry's entire existence. His father, Henry Bolingbroke, made a desperate gamble. When the real king, Richard II, banished Bolingbroke from England for political disagreements, the exiled nobleman returned years later with an army and seized the crown. Think about that for a moment. A man became king by force, by ambition, by sheer daring. And this changed everything for young Henry. He was no longer just a minor noble's son. He was suddenly the heir to the throne of England. He was created Prince of Wales, given titles beyond counting, and brought to live in the royal court. Yet something was deeply wrong. Picture a boy of perhaps 12 years old, standing in the shadow of his father's triumph, but also standing in the shadow of a terrible truth. His father was a usurper. The crown did not rightfully belong to him. And young Henry was the son of a man who had stolen a crown. This weight, this knowledge, would never fully leave him. But something else happened during these years that would change Henry even more profoundly. While his father was seizing power in London, young Henry was being held as a hostage by the very king his father had just overthrown. Richard II took the boy into his own care, treated him with unexpected kindness, and even took him on campaign to Ireland. Richard knighted the boy himself, a great honor for someone so young. And according to some accounts, young Henry came to see Richard as something like a father figure. Imagine that boy, separated from his real father, drawn to the man who should have been his enemy. When his father finally sent for him, the boy hesitated. He went first to Richard in the tower, and only at Richard's insistence did he go to his father. Think about what it means to be raised as a prince when your father stole the throne. Every day, young Henry walked through palaces built by other kings. Every day, he saw nobles who remembered the old king, who wondered if this family truly deserved to rule. His father grew old and sick, and the kingdom grew restless with rebellion. Welsh nobles rose up under a leader named Owain Glenn, declaring independence and threatening to destroy everything. And who was sent to handle this rebellion? The young prince. At 15 years old, Henry was given command of English forces in Wales. He was expected to solve a problem that grown generals had failed to solve. And the truth is, he struggled. His early campaigns were marked by failure. The Welsh rebels kept winning, kept escaping, kept burning English holdings to the ground. Henry seemed like a disappointment. He seemed like proof that the son of a usurper could not hold the kingdom together. But the world was not finished with him, and neither was he finished with himself. At the age of 16, Henry faced his first real battle, not against Welsh rebels, but against English rebels led by a noble family called the Percys. At the Battle of Shrewsbury in July of 1403, the young prince rode out to fight alongside his ailing father against the rebel forces. The battle was fierce and bloody, and in the middle of the fighting, disaster struck. An arrow struck Henry directly in the face. It entered below his eye, drove deep into his skull, and lodged there in a place that should have killed him instantly. Picture that moment. A 16-year-old boy on a muddy battlefield, an arrow buried in his face, blood streaming everywhere. A surgeon had to use special tongues to extract the arrowhead, a procedure that took 3 long weeks to complete because the wound kept getting infected. There were no painkillers. There were no antibiotics. Every day was agony, and yet somehow, against all odds, Henry survived. The scar on his face would remain for the rest of his life. A permanent reminder of the day he should have died but didn't. Can you imagine living through that? Wounded so severely that people expected you to die. Spending months recovering while your enemies laughed and your own position grew weaker. But Henry kept going. He learned from his failures in Wales, changed his strategy, and gradually began to turn the tide against the rebels. He stopped trying to chase them in open battle, and instead seized their castles, one by one, garrisoning them with soldiers who could hold the territory permanently. He used early cannon technology to break their defenses. He starved them out. It was slow, patient, brutal work, but it worked. By the time Henry was in his early 20s, the Welsh rebellion had been crushed. He had earned his reputation as a military commander. And then something extraordinary occurred. Henry's father grew too ill to rule. For the last years of his reign, Henry IV was barely able to function, and who stepped forward to take control? The son he had always seemed to distrust. In January of 1410, Prince Henry took practical control of the government, working with his uncles from the Beaufort family to manage the kingdom. He issued orders, made decisions, ran the council while his father lingered in royal chambers. But this did not last. By November of 1411, Henry IV dismissed his son from the council entirely. The father and son had disagreed over policy, and the king chose to remove the prince from power. For the next 2 years, Henry lived in something like disgrace. He was given responsibilities but denied real authority. He was watched, perhaps suspected, certainly not trusted. But then, on March the 21st, 1413, Henry IV died, and the prince who had been pushed aside, dismissed, perhaps even hated by his own father, became King Henry V of England. Picture that moment. A man of 26 years old, who had spent his entire life being told he was not good enough, who had been kept at arm's length by his own father, who had nearly died from an arrow wound, who had struggled and failed and fought his way up from nothing, suddenly stands alone at the height of power. The crown is on his head. The kingdom is his. And what would he do with it? Would he be content to rule quietly, to enjoy the wealth and comfort of his new position? Or would he reach for something far greater, something that would make the entire world remember his name forever? Henry chose greatness, and the path he chose was France. The English kings had long claimed that they had a right to rule parts of France, territories that had been lost generations earlier. These were old claims, half-forgotten, convenient excuses for endless war. But Henry took them seriously. In 1415, he launched his invasion of France with an army of thousands. His goal was nothing less than the complete conquest of the French kingdom. Most people thought he was mad. The French were far larger, far richer, far more powerful. The English had no chance of victory, and at first, things seemed to confirm these doubts. The campaign was grueling. Disease spread through the English camp. Henry fell ill. But he refused to turn back. He besieged the town of Harfleur and took it after weeks of fighting, but the cost was enormous. His army was depleted, exhausted, barely able to stand. And then, when most commanders would have retreated to regroup, Henry made a decision that seemed impossibly reckless. He marched his weakened army deeper into enemy territory, directly toward the French forces that were closing in behind him. And then came the day that changed everything. October the 25th, 1415. The Battle of Agincourt. The French army, with perhaps 10 times more soldiers than Henry had, blocked his path. They were confident of victory. They expected to crush the English and end this invasion once and for all. And what did Henry do? He gave a speech. We still have the words today, passed down through centuries, inspiring people to this very moment. He told his tired, hungry, outnumbered men that they were few but they were brave. That the enemy was many but they would fight anyway. That this day would be remembered forever. That those who survived would be proud, and those who died would be honored. And then he led them into battle. The French knights, weighed down by heavy armor, charged across muddy fields. The English archers, hidden in the forests, fired endless volleys of arrows. And the result was nothing short of miraculous. The French army was completely destroyed. Thousands of French nobles died in the mud. The flower of French chivalry lay slaughtered on the field. Henry had won the most impossible victory in the history of warfare. Think about what that moment meant. A king who had been called nobody, who had struggled and suffered, and been dismissed and forgotten, now stood triumphant on a battlefield that would be remembered forever. His name was spoken with awe in every court of Europe. His enemies trembled before him. He had proven, beyond any doubt, that he deserved to sit on the throne his father had stolen. And he was just getting started. In the years that followed, Henry conquered all of Normandy, the ancient French heartland. He besieged Rouen, the great city, and took it after months of fighting. He made alliance with the Duke of Burgundy, and in 1420, he achieved what no English king had ever achieved before. The French king, Charles VI, who had been mentally unstable for years, signed the Treaty of Troyes. Henry was recognized not just as conqueror, but as heir to the French throne. He would become King of France when Charles died. He married Charles's daughter, a princess named Catherine. The dream of his ancestors, the conquest of France, seemed suddenly within reach. But here is where the story takes its darkest turn. The price Henry paid for all of this was his own life. The campaigns in France had been brutal, exhausting, deadly. Henry himself was wounded multiple times. He fell ill during the siege of Milan, an illness from which he never truly recovered. In August of 1422, at the age of only 35, King Henry V died in a French forest, far from home, with his dream of ruling both England and France still unfulfilled. He left behind an infant son, who would become one of the most tragic kings in English history. Henry had conquered a kingdom, but he could not live to enjoy it. He had proven everyone wrong, but the proof came at the cost of everything else. He died, as so many great men die, before the work was truly finished. Now I want you to think about this story and what it means for your own life. Perhaps you feel like nobody right now. Perhaps people have dismissed you, underestimated you, told you that you cannot achieve your dreams. Perhaps you are struggling with something that seems impossibly difficult, something that requires more than you feel you have to give. Let me tell you something important. The story of Henry V is not just about a king who conquered France. It is about a human being who refused to give up when everything seemed lost. He was wounded, and he kept fighting. He was dismissed, and he kept working. He was told he was nobody, and he became a legend. You are doing the same thing right now, in your own way. Every word you learn in English is a step forward. Every time you struggle and keep going, you are building something that will last. The progress you cannot see is still there, growing slowly in the darkness, like a seed that does not yet know it will become a forest. Maybe sometimes the words do not come easily. Maybe sometimes you feel like giving up. But remember Henry, remember the boy with the arrow in his face. Remember the prince who was dismissed by his own father. He kept going, and so must you. What part of his journey surprised you most? Was it the arrow wound that should have killed him, or the battle that should have destroyed his army? Was it the father who never fully trusted him, or the kingdom he conquered against every expectation? I would love to hear what you think. Leave a comment below and tell me which part of his story moved you the most. And remember, your story is still being written. Every day you choose to keep learning. Every time you refuse to give up, you are adding another chapter to a story that will one day be remarkable. There are many more journeys waiting here. Keep listening, keep learning, keep going. This is Talewise English.